Racist cop attacks U.S. Army colonel, gets shocked when she calls Pentagon. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident involving a U.S. Army colonel and a police officer. The story unfolds with an encounter that quickly escalates due to the officer's racially charged behavior. The confrontation captures the officer's aggressive approach, marked by unwarranted hostility and discrimination. With a calm demeanor, she contacts the Pentagon, seeking immediate intervention. If you're excited about this story, please let us know. If you enjoyed the video, please press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback has inspired me to collect more uplifting and meaningful stories.
Cop tries to humiliate black woman, but when she calls the Pentagon, he panics. Late one humid summer night on a quiet stretch of highway in rural Georgia, a routine traffic stop escalated into a display of raw prejudice and unchecked authority. Officer Todd Wentworth, a local cop with a history of harassing motorists, pulled over Dr. Vanessa King, a poised black woman returning from a family visit. Unimpressed by her credentials, he tried to humiliate her, treating her with contempt and suspicion, not knowing her true identity. Then Vanessa made one calm, decisive phone call to the Pentagon. In that moment, Officer Wentworth's smug grin vanished. Little did he know, his worst nightmare was only beginning. Officer Todd Wentworth considered himself the undisputed enforcer of Pinevale County's roads. He was tall and broad-shouldered, well known for his intimidating demeanor and selective sense of justice. Pinevale was a small, predominantly white town in rural Georgia, with one main thoroughfare, a handful of shops, and a population that mostly stuck to their own. Despite the tight-knit community, or perhaps because of it, rumors circulated about Wentworth's unprofessional stops, usually targeting people of color passing through. Late one Saturday evening, the summer heat still lingered, clinging to the asphalt like a suffocating blanket. Wentworth's patrol car idled on the side of Route 15, headlights off, radar gun resting on his lap. He swigged a lukewarm cola and scanned the dimly lit road for potential violators. It wasn't just about safety for him, it was also about control, about the little rush he got whenever he put someone in their place. He had no idea that night would change his life forever. Several miles away, Dr. Vanessa King drove her black sedan along the same quiet highway, feeling the weight of exhaustion from her recent trip. She was a tall, elegant woman in her mid-30s, her skin a warm brown that glowed with inner confidence. Vanessa had been visiting her elderly aunt in a nearby city, helping arrange home care and making sure her medications were in order. The trip had gone longer than expected, leaving Vanessa driving at an hour when she would have preferred to be safely tucked into bed. What most people didn't know, unless they asked, was that Vanessa was not only a physician specializing in internal medicine, but also a recently commissioned lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, attached to a specialized unit that communicated with the Pentagon's top brass. Her father was a retired Air Force colonel who had introduced her to military culture from a young age. She'd grown up in different corners of the country, eventually finding her calling in both medicine and national service. Though she hated stereotypes, she was well aware that a black woman driving an expensive sedan in certain areas could draw unwanted attention. Still, she believed in the rule of law. If something ever happened, she trusted her credentials and calm approach would prevail. She never imagined she'd face a test quite like this. Vanessa saw the headlights in her rearview mirror before she noticed the flash of red and blue. The patrol car appeared from a shadowy turnoff along the highway, speeding up behind her. Her stomach sank. She glanced at her speedometer. She was barely going over the limit, maybe by 2 or 3 miles per hour, if that. Sighing, she hit her blinker and pulled over, heart thumping with apprehension. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had done nothing wrong. Behind her, Officer Wentworth emerged from his cruiser, adjusting his belt. The dash camera's faint red light glowed, though in the gloom of night it was hardly visible. He took his time strolling up to Vanessa's driver's side window, scanning her sedan for anything that might justify his stop. Vanessa lowered her window and kept both hands on the steering wheel. Years of experience, plus her parents' cautionary lessons, had taught her to show the utmost compliance during a traffic stop, especially in an unfamiliar place. Despite her best efforts, she felt tension coil in her shoulders, anticipating what might come next. Officer Wentworth shone his flashlight directly into her eyes, his tone clipped. "License and registration," he barked. Vanessa squinted against the harsh light, slowly reaching into her purse. "Of course, officer," she said, maintaining an even voice. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Wentworth huffed, ignoring her question at first. He took her license and registration, then flipped through them with exaggerated slowness. When his eyes flicked across her name, a glimmer of disdain etched into his features. "Vanessa King, from Washington, D.C. Are you aware you were going 10 miles over the limit?" She kept her expression neutral, though she doubted she was going more than a few miles over. "I apologize if I exceeded the limit," she answered carefully. "I'm not from around here and might have missed a sign." Wentworth's gaze narrowed, picking up on her composed manner. He leaned in closer. "You got anything in the car I should know about? Drugs, weapons?" "No, officer." He let his flashlight linger on her face, then scanned the back seat. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he muttered. "I'll be right back." Back in his squad car, Wentworth ran her license through the system. Finding nothing unusual, he tapped his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. The standard background check came back clean. No outstanding warrants, no prior arrests, nothing. He frowned. This woman was squeaky clean, which to him sometimes implied a hidden story. In his experience, people from elsewhere often had secrets. He glanced at the car's make and model. A fairly new sedan, definitely on the pricey side. In a small county with a modest average income, that set off alarms in his mind. She must be up to something, he told himself, ignoring how little sense that actually made. Wentworth exited the cruiser and approached Vanessa again. This time his tone was more confrontational. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Vanessa's heart fluttered, but she complied. She opened the door carefully, stepping onto the gravel shoulder. She was tall, with a poised military posture that seemed to irk Wentworth further. He towered over her, shoulders tense, waiting for any sign of disobedience. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Wentworth ordered, his voice laced with unmistakable aggression. Vanessa's instinctive reaction was to protest. She'd done nothing to warrant a search. She caught his hand creeping toward his holster, though, and forced herself to remain calm. "Officer, is there a reason you're conducting a search?" she asked steadily, though her pulse hammered. He responded by pressing a palm between her shoulder blades, guiding her forward. The hood's metal was still warm from the engine beneath. "Don't move," Wentworth growled. He patted her down roughly, a routine procedure, but done with an air of vindictive pleasure. Vanessa felt a flush of indignation, yet she knew better than to resist. When he found nothing, he muttered, "Don't go anywhere," and released her. Vanessa straightened, carefully returning her arms to her sides. She could feel gravel digging into her shoes as she stood at the roadside, headlights illuminating her silhouette like a stage. Wentworth proceeded to rummage through her car without asking consent, searching the glove box, under the seats, and even popping the trunk. Vanessa looked back, wanting to object on legal grounds, but fear held her silent. She hadn't given him permission, but she also understood the potential cost of refusing an aggressive officer in the middle of nowhere, especially as a black woman. She tried to focus on the still night air, the crickets chirping in the distance, anything to keep her composure. After several minutes of fruitless scouring, Wentworth emerged from the trunk, frustration evident. "You always travel alone at this hour?" he asked, barely hiding his hostility. Vanessa swallowed. "I was visiting my aunt. She's unwell." "And you're from Washington, D.C., you said?" "Yes, I live there." "Is that a problem?" Wentworth glared at her. "Ma'am, you don't question me. I'm the one asking the questions. Now, what do you really do for work? Your registration says you're Dr. King. Doctor of what, exactly?" Vanessa tried to moderate her breathing. She could sense the venom behind his words. "I'm a licensed physician," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve." Wentworth froze. For a split second, a hint of unease flashed across his face, but instead of backing off, he sneered. "Right, and I'm the president," he snickered, evidently not believing her. "A fancy doctor from D.C., driving alone in Pinevale at night. Sounds fishy." He gestured for her to step off the road toward his cruiser. "We'll see if your story checks out," he said, though he made no move to radio dispatch with her updated information. Instead, he appeared to be enjoying exerting his power over her. Vanessa felt anger stirring. She'd faced prejudice in subtle ways before, condescending comments at medical conferences or assumptions in military circles that she was an aide rather than an officer. But this was different. The blatant hostility, combined with the potential danger, made her chest tighten. Wentworth towered over her, shining his flashlight under her chin as if she were a criminal. "Maybe you should come down to the station," he suggested ominously. "Let me call this in." Vanessa had reached her limit. She was fully aware she had the legal right to remain silent until an attorney was present, but she also knew she had resources that could bypass this entire charade. She pulled out her phone, careful to move slowly. "Officer," she said, "I'm going to make a call now." He snorted, crossing his arms. "Yeah, call whoever you want, Doctor." He emphasized the word mockingly, evidently believing she was lying. Vanessa pressed a contact in her favorites list. Major Samantha Browning, her direct liaison at the Pentagon, where Vanessa occasionally consulted on medical logistics for overseas deployments. As the phone rang, the surreal feeling that her real life and this backwater traffic stop were colliding washed over her. She never anticipated using her Pentagon connections for personal reasons, but at this point, she sensed it was her only safeguard. Wentworth paced a few feet away, occasionally shooting scowls in Vanessa's direction. She caught snippets of radio chatter through the open door of his cruiser, but it didn't sound like official business regarding her. He might have only pretended to run her name again. In the darkness, the wind rustled through pine trees, punctuating the stillness. Finally, Vanessa heard a click. Major Browning's crisp, no-nonsense voice sounded on the line. "Dr. King, is everything all right?" The concern in Browning's tone was genuine. They rarely spoke outside scheduled calls unless an urgent matter arose. Vanessa exhaled, relieved. She explained the situation in terse but clear terms. "I'm in Pinevale County, Georgia, pulled over by an officer who won't accept my identification. He's threatening to take me to the station. Major, I might need some immediate assistance." Browning was silent for a beat. Then she said, "Hold tight, Dr. King. Let me get this to the right channels. Are you safe right now?" Vanessa's gaze flicked to Wentworth, who appeared annoyed at her phone call. "Relatively, for the moment," she replied quietly. Major Browning's voice hardened. "Stay on the line. I'll loop in Colonel Avery and see what we can do. You're not alone in this." Wentworth leaned in, trying to overhear the conversation. "Who are you talking to, Miss King?" Vanessa ignored his derisive tone, opting for a measured reply. "I'm on the phone with my direct liaison at the Pentagon. If you have any issues with my credentials, you can speak to her or my commanding officer. She can confirm my military status." She kept her voice polite, yet unyielding. Wentworth's face twitched. Whether he believed her or not, something in her calm confidence must have made him uneasy. He glanced around at the empty highway, perhaps realizing if she truly had connections, this could blow back on him. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "I'll handle this how I see fit," he snapped, though his bravado sounded less certain. "Now hang up that phone and cooperate." Vanessa pressed the phone closer to her ear, hearing the muffled conversation as Major Browning hurriedly contacted Colonel Avery. She didn't hang up. Instead, she said into the phone, "Yes, Major, I understand. Let's see if the officer will speak with you." Wentworth ripped the phone from her hand, ignoring her cry of protest. He glared at the screen. "Don't try that with me," he said through clenched teeth. "You think you can just call in reinforcements from the Pentagon? Yeah, sure. His voice dripped with sarcasm, but underneath there was undeniable tension. On the other end of the line, Major Browning's raised voice carried through the speaker. "Officer, identify yourself immediately. This is an official request from the United States Department of Defense." Wentworth's jaw set. He recognized the commanding tone. It was not the voice of some random friend or family member. This was serious. He froze, phone still in his hand, as if paralyzed by indecision. Vanessa could see the gears turning in his head. He was debating whether to defy the voice on the phone or comply. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. If he refused to identify himself, he risked real repercussions. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. Slowly, he lowered the phone and barked into it. "This is Officer Todd Wentworth, Pinevale County Sheriff's Department." "Officer Wentworth," Major Browning's voice rose with authoritative clarity. "I'm Major Samantha Browning, liaison for the Pentagon's Medical Intelligence Branch. Dr. Vanessa King is a commissioned officer under our oversight. Let me be very clear. You're interfering with an active duty reservist under direct contract with the Department of Defense. If you continue to harass her or detain her without cause, you are violating federal protocols." Wentworth stood there, phone pressed to his ear, face turning crimson. He glanced at Vanessa, who had reclaimed her composure, arms folded across her chest. He managed a stammered reply. I was just doing my job, ma'am." "Then do it properly," Major Browning shot back. "Run her license and registration as protocol demands. Issue a citation if you must for a legitimate traffic violation, but do not detain her further without probable cause, and you will return her phone immediately." There was a brief silence. Then the line clicked. Major Browning had hung up. The hush of the night seemed louder than ever as Wentworth slowly lowered the phone, returning it to Vanessa with trembling hands. Vanessa felt an odd mix of triumph, relief, and lingering anger. It shouldn't have required a call to the Pentagon to ensure fair treatment in a roadside stop. She took her phone back, eyes never leaving Wentworth's flushed face. "May I leave now, officer?" she asked, voice cool. He cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. Yes. I'll just write you a warning." He retreated to his cruiser, rummaging for his citation pad. The stiff formality in his posture made it clear his bravado had vanished. Yet Vanessa wasn't done. She wasn't about to let him walk away without understanding the gravity of what he'd done. She stepped to the edge of his vehicle. "Officer Wentworth, I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal, nor do I take kindly to having my phone snatched away. You violated my rights tonight." Wentworth kept his eyes on the warning he was hurriedly scribbling, tension radiating from his shoulders. His pen scratched the paper with shaky strokes. He could feel the weight of her words and the phone call. The magnitude of what had just transpired was finally sinking in. He handed her the written warning without meeting her eyes. "Sign here," he said softly. Vanessa complied, though she knew this entire fiasco would be documented elsewhere too, particularly with her superiors. She could see the faint reflection of her face in the cruiser's side mirror, illuminated by its interior light. She looked tired, but resolute. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "You can go. Just watch your speed next time." She nodded curtly. "Thank you, officer," she said, though there was no gratitude in her tone. She turned on her heel and slipped back into her car. Before she shut the door, she locked eyes with Wentworth one last time. He looked rattled, uncertain, and very much alone in that moment. Vanessa started the engine and pulled away from the shoulder, the hush of the night returning to envelop the empty highway behind her. She could see the swirl of her taillights reflected in the rearview mirror as she left him standing in a cloud of dust. Although she was free to go, Vanessa's emotions churned. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. A swirl of relief, anger, and a tinge of fear fluttered in her chest. She'd faced adversity before, but the abruptness of that humiliating stop had left her shaken. Even with her high-level connections, she realized how close she'd come to being unlawfully detained. Or worse, She glanced at her phone, noticing missed calls and text notifications from Major Browning and Colonel Avery. She couldn't handle them while driving, so she decided to exit at the next rest stop. She needed a moment to decompress, to ensure she was truly safe before continuing her journey. As she drove, her mind raced with questions. Should she file a formal complaint against Officer Wentworth? Would he try to retaliate later? And what if there were others in Pinevale's department who shared his biases? 10 minutes later, Vanessa parked at a well-lit rest stop. The fluorescent glow from overhead lamps cast stark shadows across the empty lot. She locked her doors and immediately returned Major Browning's call. Browning picked up on the second ring. "Dr. King, are you all right?" Browning asked without preamble. Vanessa exhaled. "Yes, I'm fine. Shaken, but okay. He let me go." Colonel Avery's voice broke into the conversation. Apparently Browning had put Vanessa on speaker. "Glad to hear that, Lieutenant Colonel," Avery said. "That officer is in serious trouble if he so much as breathes wrong toward you again. We've already contacted local authorities." Vanessa's brow furrowed. "Wait, did you call the Pinevale County Sheriff's Office?" "We sure did," Avery confirmed. "And let's say the sheriff wasn't pleased to hear that one of his deputies is harassing a federal contractor, especially one with your clearance level. He promised an internal review, effective immediately." Vanessa felt a wave of gratitude for their quick action, but also worry about potential backlash. "Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate your support." "Anytime," Avery said, voice firm. "If there's anything else you need, don't hesitate to let us know." That night, Vanessa drove the remaining miles in cautious vigilance, frequently checking her mirrors. Thankfully, she encountered no further trouble. By the time she reached her aunt's place, an aging bungalow on the outskirts of a small city, her eyes were heavy with fatigue. She slipped inside quietly, not wanting to wake her aunt. She spent a sleepless night replaying the stop in her head. Every condescending word, every rough pat-down, the humiliating search of her car. It gnawed at her that this was not an isolated incident. There were countless stories of black men and women facing similar or worse treatment. Many didn't have the advantage of calling a Pentagon liaison. By dawn, she resolved to do something about it, not just for herself, but for others. She drafted a letter to the Pinevale County Sheriff's Department outlining the entire incident. She included dates, times, and the fact that Officer Wentworth forcibly took her phone and conducted a search without consent. With her aunt still asleep, Vanessa quietly emailed the statement, copying Colonel Avery and Major Browning. Back in Pinevale, Sheriff Randall Moore was awakened by his desk sergeant around 5 a.m. The sergeant sounded anxious. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Within minutes, Moore was reviewing a formal complaint from Dr. Vanessa King, Lieutenant Colonel U.S., Army Reserve. The complaint had also been forwarded to the Department of Defense, to Moore's superiors at the state level, and had even been CC'd to the local representative's office. Moore's stomach twisted. Pinevale was not a wealthy county, and the department was always on thin ice with funding. The last thing they needed was a PR disaster and possible federal investigation. The letter described Wentworth's misconduct in detail: unlawful search, physical intimidation, seizing a personal phone without cause. Sheriff Moore knew Todd Wentworth had a history of being tough on outsiders, but he never imagined it would escalate to the point of involving the Pentagon. Cursing under his breath, Moore dialed Wentworth's number. This was going to be a day from hell. Wentworth, groggy from a restless night, was startled awake by the phone's shrill ring. He recognized the sheriff's number immediately. Morning, Sheriff," he muttered, clearing his throat. Sheriff Moore wasted no time. "I've got a stack of complaints about you. Care to explain what the hell happened last night?" His voice crackled with anger through the receiver. Wentworth tried to sound confident, but panic tinged his words. "Sheriff, I was just doing a routine stop. She was speeding. She looked suspicious." "Suspicious?" Moore roared. "She's a damn army doctor, Todd. And now we've got the DOD breathing down our necks. They want a formal inquiry. We could lose funding, get slapped with civil rights lawsuits. Did you even run her license properly? Wentworth paused, uncertain. The memory of the phone call from the Pentagon roiled in his mind. I tried to, but she got all high and mighty, so I did a search. Moore's frustration peaked. You had no probable cause to search her car. I need you in my office right now. Don't bother coming in uniform. Meanwhile, Vanessa awoke later that morning to find her aunt, Eloise, humming in the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee wafted through the small house. Eloise was in her 70s, a petite woman with kind eyes and a sharp tongue when provoked. Despite her arthritis, she was an early riser. Vanessa greeted her aunt with a hug, grateful for normalcy. Over breakfast, Eloise noticed Vanessa's taut expression. "Darling, what's got you so worked up?" Vanessa hesitated, not wanting to worry her aunt, but decided honesty was best. She relayed the details of her frightening encounter with Officer Wentworth. Eloise's eyes flared with outrage. "I've lived in Georgia all my life. I know how some folks can be, but that's unacceptable. You sure you're all right, honey?" Vanessa nodded. "I'm safe now, and I've already reported it. My colleagues at the Pentagon are backing me." Eloise's expression softened with pride. "That's my girl. You do what you need to do. Don't let them get away with that nonsense." While Vanessa sipped her coffee, she received an incoming call. The caller ID showed the Pinevale County Sheriff's Office. She exchanged a glance with Eloise, who nodded reassuringly. "Hello," Vanessa said, heart thumping. "Good morning, Dr. King," came a gravelly voice. "This is Sheriff Randall Moore. I wanted to inform you that Officer Wentworth has been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation of last night's incident." Vanessa felt a slight wave of relief. "Thank you for the update, Sheriff. I appreciate it." Moore cleared his throat. "We take these matters seriously. The Department of Defense has also expressed their concern. We'll conduct a thorough review, and if we find wrongdoing, we'll address it according to protocol." Vanessa's tone remained courteous, but firm. "I trust you will. I hope your department understands how serious this is. I'm willing to cooperate with your investigation in any way needed." "Yes, ma'am," Moore said, sounding weary. "We'll be in touch." Across town in the plain, unremarkable building that housed the Pinevale County Sheriff's Office, Officer Wentworth sat on a hard chair outside the sheriff's door, palms sweating. In the hallway, a few of his colleagues passed by, avoiding eye contact. They'd heard rumors that Todd had messed with the wrong person. Finally, Sheriff Moore emerged. He beckoned Wentworth into his office, closing the door behind them. The room was dim, papers piled haphazardly on a metal desk. Moore settled into his squeaky chair, fixing a piercing gaze on Wentworth. "Todd," the sheriff began, leaning forward, "this is bad, real bad. You're on leave while we investigate. Hand over your badge and gun." Wentworth's jaw dropped. "Sheriff, come on, I've been—" Moore cut him off. "I have no choice. The DOD is on my tail, the county commissioners screaming about lawsuits, and I've got half a dozen local activists calling about your record of stops. There's a pattern here, Todd, and it doesn't look good." Wentworth's face hardened. "Activists? Since when do we let them run the show?" The sheriff slammed his hand on the desk. "Watch your mouth. We're following the law, not caving to pressure. Now, do as I say. Badge and gun." Reluctantly, Wentworth unpinned his badge from his uniform and set his service weapon on the desk. His chest burned with resentment. "Sheriff, she was speeding. I had a right." Moore glared. "A right to search her vehicle without consent, to forcibly grab her phone. Did you even have probable cause?" Wentworth floundered. He could sense the ground crumbling beneath him. "She was uncooperative." Moore let out a derisive laugh. "She was frightened and tried to call for backup because you wouldn't listen. I've seen the dash cam, Todd. It's not good." That revelation stung Wentworth like a slap. He'd forgotten the dash cam was rolling, capturing every moment. His tone, his rough handling, his intimidation tactics. He knew the footage would bury him if it went public. "This investigation is out of my hands, Todd." The sheriff said, softer now. "I'm telling you as a friend. Get a lawyer." 2 days later, the local news caught wind of the incident. A reporter from WSB-TV in Atlanta arrived in Pinevale, seeking an interview with either Dr. King or the sheriff's office. Rumors swirled about a Pentagon intervention in a traffic stop, fueling curiosity across the state. Vanessa, while initially hesitant to speak on camera, recognized the potential to advocate for broader reform. Before agreeing to any interview, she conferred with her superiors at the Pentagon. They gave her the green light, as long as she didn't divulge classified details regarding her work. So, on a warm afternoon, Vanessa stood outside her aunt's bungalow, politely greeting a young reporter named Lillian Russo. The camera crew set up in the modest front yard, the sun beating down as neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Eloise watched from the porch, arms folded, offering moral support. Lillian began with gentle questions about Vanessa's background and career. Vanessa explained how she juggled her medical practice and her responsibilities as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. Then Lillian edged toward the traffic stop. "Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened that night?" Vanessa inhaled, recalling the wave of fear and indignation. She spoke calmly, describing how she was pulled over for alleged speeding, how the officer's demeanor quickly became hostile, how he conducted a search without her permission, and how he confiscated her phone when she tried to call for clarification on her rights. "Had I not been able to contact my colleagues at the Pentagon," she concluded, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I'm not sure how far Officer Wentworth would have taken things. This wasn't just about me. It's about anyone who could be targeted like this without recourse." Lillian nodded sympathetically. "What do you hope comes from this, Dr. King?" Vanessa's gaze flicked to the camera lens. "Accountability. Reform. The knowledge that you can't just terrorize citizens without consequences, regardless of the color of their skin or their background. Everyone deserves fair treatment under the law." The interview ended. After the cameras packed up, Vanessa's knees felt weak. She never sought the spotlight, but she hoped that speaking out might help prevent future incidents. Across town, Officer Wentworth watched the televised interview in a small bar called the Rusted Rail. The place was nearly empty, a few patrons nursing afternoon beers. Wentworth sat hunched at a corner table, eyes fixed on the TV mounted over the bar. He seethed as he listened to Vanessa's poised recounting of that night. When the segment ended, the bartender, a stout man named Ronnie, approached. "Tough break, Todd," he murmured, sliding him another beer. "I heard they're out for your head." Wentworth scowled. "She's blowing it out of proportion. I was doing my job." Ronnie shrugged, glancing at the newly arrived customers at the door. "Might want to lay low. Folks around here, some are on your side, but a lot are talking about how it's time for the county to clean house." Wentworth ignored the warning, draining his beer in one gulp. He felt cornered and betrayed. In his mind, he was the victim, singled out for simply enforcing the law. A slow-burning resentment toward Vanessa King grew inside him, fueling dangerous impulses. The next morning, Vanessa woke to find her phone buzzing non-stop. A flood of messages from old college friends, from colleagues in Washington, from extended family. Most were supportive, praising her courage, offering solidarity, yet a few were chillingly hateful, laced with racial slurs and threats. She realized her contact information must have circulated after the TV report. Although unsettled, Vanessa took precautions. She alerted Colonel Avery and Major Browning, who assured her that if any credible threat arose, they'd loop in the FBI. It was surreal. One moment she was an ordinary citizen visiting family, the next she was a public figure in a civil rights controversy. Still determined to look after her aunt, Vanessa ventured into downtown Pinevale to pick up groceries and medication. She felt uneasy, glancing over her shoulder as she walked. The small shops and quaint streets seemed peaceful enough, but every so often she caught a disapproving glare or overheard a hushed remark. A wave of relief washed over her when she emerged from the pharmacy to see an unexpected face. Deputy Marisol Grant, a kind-hearted officer she'd met briefly during a prior visit. Grant approached, offering a gentle smile. "Dr. King, mind if we talk a moment?" Vanessa, clutching her grocery bag, nodded. "Sure, Deputy. Everything okay?" Grant removed her hat, holding it respectfully. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. Not all of us in the department share Wentworth's attitudes. Many of us want him gone. He's been a problem for a while." Vanessa felt an immediate sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Deputy Grant. I appreciate hearing that. It means a lot to me to know there are good officers here." Grant looked around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "Sheriff Moore's hands are partly tied by politics, but I can assure you the dashcam footage is damning. Wentworth's not likely to slip away from this. In the meantime, stay safe. If you need anything, here's my personal cell." She scribbled a number on a small notepad and handed it to Vanessa. Touched by the gesture, Vanessa thanked her. For the first time in days, she felt a small spark of hope that justice might actually prevail. While rumors of the dashcam video spread, local activists from the nearby city of Macon organized a small rally in Pinevale, calling for accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Vanessa was invited to attend, but felt torn about joining a public demonstration. She didn't want to escalate tensions and potentially put her aunt at risk. However, she also saw value in standing with those demanding reform. After discussing it with Eloise, who insisted, "We can't hide forever," Vanessa decided to go. Late on a Friday afternoon, she drove to the dusty field on the outskirts of Pinevale, where around 50 people gathered. Signs reading "Equal Justice Now" and "End Racial Profiling" waved in the warm breeze. The crowd was diverse, black, white, young, old, and a sense of unity crackled in the air. As Vanessa parked, she noticed a handful of uniformed officers from the county watching from a distance. To her relief, she spotted Deputy Grant among them, offering a small nod of recognition. On a makeshift platform, local NAACP representatives and community leaders spoke passionately about civil rights, fairness, and the urgent need for oversight. Then they invited Vanessa to the microphone. Standing before the crowd, her heart hammering, Vanessa cleared her throat. "My name is Dr. Vanessa King. I'm a physician and an Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel. A few nights ago, I was pulled over in this county. The officer violated my rights, searched me and my vehicle without cause, and tried to prevent me from contacting my military superiors." She paused, taking in the attentive faces. "This shouldn't have happened, to me or to anyone. We shouldn't need high-level connections to be treated with dignity. That's why I stand with you, demanding accountability. We can't let abuses of power go unchecked. We must work together, law enforcement, citizens, activists, to create a community where everyone feels safe." Applause erupted, some in the crowd cheering her name. Vanessa felt a swell of emotion. She glanced at Eloise, who stood near the front, clapping fiercely. Deputy Grant, by the police vehicles, looked on approvingly. For an instant, Vanessa glimpsed a future where Pinevale might heal, forging a more just path. But not everyone welcomed that vision. Hidden in the shadows of an old oak tree, Officer Wentworth watched from a distance, seething. He was off-duty, in street clothes, arms crossed over his chest. The heat of the day mixed with the slow burn of his anger, fueling an irrational sense of betrayal. To him, Vanessa was inciting a mob against law enforcement. She was humiliating him nationally, tarnishing his reputation. Deep down, he knew he'd overstepped the night he pulled her over, but his pride refused to let him admit wrongdoing. Instead, he blamed her for ruining his life. As the rally concluded, people dispersed in friendly clusters. Wentworth lingered, eyes locked on Vanessa's figure as she walked with Eloise to her car. He felt a dangerous compulsion stirring, a desire to set things right, on his terms. Then he disappeared into the early evening light, plotting his next move. Over the following week, Pinevale County completed its internal affairs investigation. With the dashcam footage and Vanessa's testimony, the conclusion was clear. Officer Wentworth had indeed violated protocol and showed conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer. Sheriff Moore had no choice but to terminate Wentworth's employment. The official statement read, "Effective immediately. Todd Wentworth is released from duty. The Pinevale County Sheriff's Office has zero tolerance for misconduct that undermines public trust. We remain committed to ensuring our deputies uphold the highest standards of law enforcement." When the news broke, local media covered it extensively. Many in Pinevale felt relieved that justice had been served, though others sympathized with Wentworth, claiming he'd been unfairly made an example. Vanessa, for her part, felt a cautious sense of resolution. Yet she couldn't shake a lingering unease, remembering the look in Wentworth's eyes at the rally. With Wentworth fired, Vanessa decided to spend an extra week with her aunt, ensuring her medication schedule was established and her home care assistant was well trained. Then she planned to drive back to Washington, where her own life awaited, her medical practice, her Pentagon duties, and the swirl of city life. One crisp morning, she loaded up her sedan and said a tearful goodbye to Eloise. "Call me if you need anything," Vanessa said, hugging her aunt. "I'll try to visit again soon. Love you." "Love you too, baby. Drive safe," Eloise replied, a hint of worry in her eyes. She sensed the swirling tensions, though she prayed everything would settle now that Wentworth was gone. Vanessa turned onto the highway, relieved to leave Pinevale behind. The early sunlight dappled the road, offering a sense of a fresh start. She flicked on the radio, letting a gentle jazz tune fill the car, hoping it would soothe the last remnants of anxiety. Little did she know, a pickup truck followed at a discreet distance. Behind the wheel was Todd Wentworth, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the black sedan. His fury, instead of subsiding, had festered. He'd lost his job, faced public humiliation, and now harbored the twisted conviction that Vanessa King was responsible for destroying his life. He trailed her for miles, weaving behind other vehicles to remain inconspicuous. The traffic was moderate, and the farmland stretched on either side of the road. As they reached a more isolated stretch, Wentworth accelerated, pulling closer to Vanessa's car. In her rearview mirror, Vanessa caught a glimpse of a truck gaining on her, but she didn't recognize the driver or think much of it. She was far more focused on the excitement of returning home, considering how she would tackle her backlog of tasks at the hospital and coordinate her upcoming drill weekend with her reserve unit. Suddenly, the truck lurched forward, tailgating dangerously close. Vanessa tensed, glancing into her mirror with concern. "What the?" she murmured. She tapped her brakes lightly, hoping the driver would back off, but instead the pickup swerved into the oncoming lane as if trying to pass. Then it swerved back behind her, dangerously close again. Fear threaded through her. She considered calling 911 but wanted to be sure it wasn't just an impatient driver. She accelerated slightly, hoping to create space, but the truck matched her speed. It felt deliberate. Then, in a terrifying maneuver, the truck pulled alongside her. Vanessa turned, looking straight into the face of Todd Wentworth. His expression was a poisonous cocktail of rage and triumph. A jolt of panic shot through her. Before she could react, he swerved hard, sideswiping her sedan. Vanessa's car veered off the road, tires screeching against gravel. She fought the wheel, heart pounding, as the sedan skidded into the grassy shoulder. The front bumper clipped a road sign, spinning the car around before it finally came to a shuddering stop. Her breath ragged, Vanessa tried to steady herself. Her airbag hadn't deployed, indicating the impact was more of a glancing blow than a direct collision. But she felt the sting of seatbelt bruises forming across her chest. Through the windshield, she saw Wentworth's pickup briefly pause, as if he was checking whether she was severely injured. Then, in a burst of dust, he peeled away, speeding off down the highway. Rage and disbelief coursed through her. She scrambled for her phone, hands trembling. As she dialed 911, she prayed he wouldn't circle back to finish what he'd started. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the line. 911, what's your emergency? Vanessa forced herself to speak calmly, giving her location. "I've just been run off the road by a pickup truck driven by Todd Wentworth. He's a former Pinevale County officer. I'm slightly injured. Please send assistance." Her voice wavered at the end, the adrenaline crash making her feel lightheaded. She heard the dispatcher assure her that state troopers and an ambulance were on the way. Vanessa locked her doors, scanning the area in case Wentworth returned. The farmland around her was eerily still, the midday sun beating down relentlessly. Minutes ticked by like hours. At last, she saw flashing lights approaching from the distance. A Georgia State Patrol cruiser arrived, followed by another Pinevale County deputy's vehicle and an ambulance. Vanessa exhaled with relief. The paramedics examined her on the spot, checking her vitals. She had minor cuts from shattered window glass and was shaken but otherwise stable. Meanwhile, the state trooper took her statement, scribbling notes in a worn pad. The Pinevale deputy on the scene turned out to be Marisol Grant, who approached with an expression of alarm and concern. "My God, Dr. King, are you all right?" Grant asked, scanning the damaged sedan. Vanessa nodded, still clutching an ice pack a paramedic had given her for her shoulder. "I'll be okay, but it was definitely Todd Wentworth. He tried to run me off the road." Grant's face darkened with anger. "He's lost his mind. We'll put out a bolo immediately. Are you okay riding in the ambulance, or do you need anything else?" Vanessa shook her head. "I'll go to the hospital and get checked out, but please find him. He won't stop until he's apprehended." Grant offered a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, we'll get him." As Vanessa was transported to a local hospital for further evaluation, Pinevale County and the Georgia State Patrol initiated a manhunt for Wentworth. They circulated bulletins with his vehicle description. The local news broke the story, labeling him as armed and dangerous, advising citizens to stay indoors. While doctors in the emergency room examined Vanessa, her phone buzzed with calls from Colonel Avery and Major Browning. They were both outraged and concerned, insisting that if local authorities didn't apprehend Wentworth quickly, they would involve the FBI. After a thorough exam, Vanessa was discharged with bruises and minor lacerations. Deputy Grant offered to drive her to her aunt's place, but Vanessa couldn't help feeling uneasy. "I'll be worried until he's caught," she admitted quietly. Grant nodded in understanding. "We've got every road out of Pinevale monitored. He won't get far." Yet Vanessa suspected Wentworth was determined, fueled by hatred strong enough to risk everything. She settled into the passenger seat of Grant's cruiser, pressing a shaky hand to her temple, praying for it all to end. Under the cloak of darkness, Todd Wentworth hid in an abandoned barn near the county line, cursing his own impulsive actions. His truck had a fresh dent from sideswiping Vanessa's car, the paint scratched and battered. He knew the net was closing in. Every policeman in Georgia would be looking for him now. His chest heaved with a mixture of fear and fury. He wanted revenge, but he also knew he was out of options. He considered making a run for it, heading to another state. But his twisted pride wouldn't let him flee that easily. He wanted to finish what he started, to prove a point. The next morning, he decided on one last desperate move. He rummaged through the glove compartment, retrieving a pistol he'd kept hidden. With a final glance at his ravaged truck, he set out on foot, heading toward Pinevale. Something in him snapped entirely. Rational thought gave way to a dangerous obsession. Vanessa awoke at her aunt's house, having barely slept. The bruise on her chest ached, each breath a reminder of the close call. Eloise fussed over her, fixing breakfast and insisting she rest. But rest was impossible while Wentworth roamed free. Deputy Grant had assured her extra patrols would circle the area, but that morning the phone rang with an urgent message. Wentworth was spotted near the outskirts of Pinevale. Citizens were warned to lock their doors, remain vigilant. Vanessa's heart pounded. She questioned whether she should remain in town, potentially endangering her aunt. "I should go somewhere safe," she told Eloise, who shook her head firmly. "You're not the one who should run. If that fool shows up here, I won't hesitate to call the police." Despite Eloise's tough words, Vanessa saw the fear in her eyes. Guilt gnawed at her. She felt responsible for bringing danger to her aunt's doorstep, even though it was Wentworth who chose violence. Outside, a pair of patrol cars sat at the curb, officers stationed to keep watch. Vanessa found small comfort in their presence. She paced through the living room, glancing out the window every so often. The tension was suffocating. Then came the crackle of a police radio from one of the cruisers. A deputy ran to the door, knocking urgently. "Dr. King, we have a situation. Wentworth was seen heading toward this neighborhood on foot. We need to move you and your aunt to a safer location." Vanessa's pulse quickened. She and Eloise gathered a few essentials. The officers escorted them to a waiting SUV, the engine idling. "We'll take you to a secure hotel in the next county," the deputy said. "We'll keep a guard posted." As they stepped onto the porch, a shot rang out, echoing across the suburban stillness. Eloise screamed. One of the officers shouted, "Gunfire!" They scrambled for cover, drawing their weapons. Vanessa ducked behind the SUV, arms wrapped protectively around her aunt. Another shot whizzed by, hitting the mailbox at the edge of the lawn. The police fired back in the direction of a clump of bushes across the street. Chaos erupted. Sirens wailed in the distance, backup converging on the scene. From behind the bush, Wentworth's ragged figure emerged, pistol in hand. His face was contorted with rage, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "You ruined my life, King," he bellowed. "I lost everything because of you," one of the deputies shouted. "Drop your weapon, Wentworth. Hands in the air." He refused. "Never!" he roared, aiming the pistol wildly. Another volley of shots exchanged. The windows of a nearby car shattered. Vanessa pressed Eloise closer, trying to remain calm. In a flash, more squad cars screeched onto the street. Deputy Grant stepped out, calling through a megaphone. "Todd, stand down." "This is over!" For an excruciating moment, time seemed to freeze. Wentworth steadied his pistol, eyes locked on Vanessa. She felt a surge of terror, certain this might be the end. But before he could fire, officers swarmed him from behind, tackling him to the ground. The pistol clattered across the pavement. Wentworth fought back fiercely, but the officers subdued him, cuffing his hands behind his back. Breathless and sweating, Deputy Grant stood over him. "Todd Wentworth, you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and more counts than I can list right now," she panted. He glared up, chest heaving, frustration and hatred etched into his features. The karmic wave had finally crashed down upon him, leaving him broken and caught in the wreckage of his own making. Vanessa helped Eloise up from the ground. The older woman trembled, tears shining in her eyes. Officers rushed to confirm they were unharmed. Though shaken, both were physically okay. In that charged silence, Vanessa allowed herself a moment of relief. Wentworth's reign of terror had ended. This harrowing ordeal stands as a powerful reminder that prejudice and abuse of authority often hide beneath the facade of routine interactions, and sometimes it takes unyielding courage to stand up against them. In this case, a single traffic stop erupted into a life-threatening confrontation, but through perseverance, community support, and the unwavering assistance of colleagues in high places, Dr. Vanessa King secured both her personal safety and ultimately justice. If her story inspires you to stand against injustice or offers hope to those who've faced discrimination, then it's done its part. Thank you for witnessing this dramatic journey from fear to resolution. If you'd like more real-life tales of courage and accountability, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can spread the message that no one, regardless of rank, title, or background,